Today, we're diving deep into the topic that's been taking the world by storm: Korean cinema, K-drama, K-movies. From Parasite sweeping the Oscars to Squid Games redefining global TV, Korean films and dramas have been making history. Is this the beginning of an unstoppable era? Or could the K-media be actually at the risk of fading away? Joining me today for an exclusive interview is someone that knows this world inside out, Samuel Hamir. He's the president of the New York Asian Film Festival and director himself. He's here to break down the biggest trends, the potential challenges, and where Asian film stands in the market today. Especially if you are an aspiring actor in the US market, this is a great video. How can we get more Asian representation on TV and on screen? And what the casting directors are specifically looking for when you are auditioning. Always to keep Gracie Grace going, a like in this video, and commenting down what you have thought about today's video. Subscribing to GRAZY Grace channel right here means the world to me.
So I'm the president and executive director. I mean, that means I run the show. So that spans everything from the fundraising, finding the money to make the screenings possible, inviting guests. It goes from this to the artistic direction. So I supervise the programming. I watch a large number of the films, if not all of them, because at this point it's just too many submissions and films we're pursuing as well. We have an opening, a red carpet. I hope to see you on July 11th.
Yeah, I want to be there. So, as like a New York Asian Film Festival, you support Asian films in America?
I didn't start the festival. It was created by a group of fanboys, basically, like guys who loved Asian films, particularly like kung fu films, action, horror. Back in the days, like more than 20 years ago, the last Chinatown theater closed down. So suddenly, like these guys were like, well, how are we going to watch films now? A long story short, they're like, how about we just create a film festival and just bring films to America? So yeah, we show about 100 films from a variety of countries, Korea, of course, Japan, most of Southeast Asia. So the issue when you talk about Asian culture, it's like, what is your definition of Asia? You know, I lived in the UK for a while, and at the time, Asia really meant like South Asian. You know, like that designated people of Indian or Pakistani descent. Quite different. Like you have a completely different definition here, for example. So the definition of Asia, in short, it varies immensely. So that's also the case for the festival that I run.
Got it. And I heard your story that you're Korean, but you were adopted and then you grew up in
Yes.
France and then now you're in America. How did you get into the film world? Was this your passion since you were young?
Arts and culture in general. Yeah, I've always loved film, you know, like, and France is a major film culture. Paris is a great place to watch all kinds of films. I mean, we didn't really have the concept of foreign film per se. Like you just go watch an Iranian film. It's a film. So it's quite different from the American film culture or movie going culture. But I was also interested, you know, just about anything else related to arts and culture, literature, music. I was really into music for a long time.
Yeah.
Like you, I seem to recall. Yeah,
Yeah.
so music was a big thing. And eventually, you know, like I got into showing films, curating film series, retrospectives, tributes, and running the New York Asian Film Festival. And I'm working on a film of my own as well.
For you being in also, I guess, Hollywood and in film, I know in now 2025, the K film and Asian representation has been a bit more in the market, but do you think that it is even still hard for Asian representation in Hollywood?
Yeah, I think it's still quite well. It's gone a long way for sure. So there's been some landmark moments. I think it's a lot of pressure from outside, actually. I mean, the first foreign film, I mean, Parasite is 100% a Korean film. Do you know what I mean? So it's not just from inside. So there's, of course, the shifting demographics. We have a number of Asian American stars, but I would say more than the forces from inside America, you have also, you know, Korea has become a powerhouse on all levels. Japan has been quite present for a long time. Anime is so mainstream now. You meet people of all, you know, from all around the country. Same in Europe. They doesn't matter. You meet 18-year-old kids. people in their 50s, they watch anime. But it's still difficult. Yeah, I think it's still difficult because there's still a lot of typecasting. There's the tendency to cast the two, three Asian guys, you know. There's a lot of Asian American comedies these days, right? So like you have now sex comedies and so on. So I think that's progress. You have more variety in general. Steven Yeun is, you know, now a
Yeah.
name. But you have to also consider how it became a name. He was in The Walking Dead. He has his own part. Great character. But he really became a big deal, like in the film industry after his turn in the Lee Chang-dong movie in Burning. And he was in the Bong Joon-ho film. He was in Okja and so on. So there's sort of this back and forth between Asians in America and Asians in Asia. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
So like same like someone like Daniel Wu, when you think about it, went to Hong Kong, had a big career, he came here. Yeah, I think it's still a challenge, but things are getting better overall. But
We went to Hollywood. Do you see Asian Americans struggling to get a role
I think
because of the race?
everyone's struggling to get a role. Overall, the industry is in a strange state. I mean, there's the material conditions right now, the disaster in LA and so on. I mean, it's a tough time because for the past decades, there's an erosion of what the sense of the movie star status. You don't really have a lot of movie stars anymore. You know, like celebrities, it's not the same thing as it used to be. You have influencers and so on, completely different scenes. So you have the emergence of a new generation. You know, like Timothy Chalamet, Zendaya. It's not exactly the same as what it was in the 90s or 2000s. The last like traditional movie stars, they're 60 years old, you know. It's like Tom Cruise. Yeah, it's not that easy. There's a proliferation of content on the one hand. Yeah, it's super crowded. So there's actually paradoxically there's less and less space for great stories. So there's a lot of confusion. I mean, I find like when you're on Netflix, you spend a lot of time just flipping through, like watching 10 seconds of this, 10 seconds of that, and you rarely finish anything. Become pretty much entertainment as zoning out. Do you know what I mean? People they watch Netflix and they do something else. So when you go to a movie now, I mean, first of all, it's like 20 bucks. I mean, that's not cheap. When I was a kid, I mean, you know, you would go see a film. That's the price of a cup of coffee. So it was truly mass entertainment. Now mass entertainment, it's all the streaming, all the OTT platforms, all the streamers. You know, the Netflix has pretty much a dominance on the market. You can watch everything from home. I mean, you have so much content you can gain access to. You know, there was a time you had to go to a video store, you had to develop a relationship with a guy. It was a quest. You had to be active. Now everything comes.
With the film world, it's just going to get bigger and bigger in that way. Do you see like a prediction?
It's hard to predict. I mean, the rise of Netflix was clear, like from the start. Now it's I think it's pretty chaotic situation. I don't see no monopolies ever last forever. You know, that's just there's always tension. There's always going to be a new guy who shows up with something no one has thought of before. So I think there's going to be increased fragmentation. I mean, you can't grow forever. I mean, at some point, I mean, you see it like there's just too many films overall, too many TV shows. So at some point, you're gonna have to pick and choose. I think the tentpole films, you know, the large like the superhero movies, that's everyone's been talking about it. It has to shrink. That's just too much. It's too much of a gamble. Like essentially, you can make 4 or 5 of them a year, and they're mostly failing. I mean, you're betting a huge amount of money to just, you know, you have a weekend basically to make it and then you're done. So the time frame to be successful is extraordinarily limited. So that in terms of the transformation, well, what I'm seeing now is like, you know, you talk to random people, they've seen like crash landing on you and so on. So I think increasing fragmentation, so more diversity, whether we want it or not. All of a sudden, like there's a pretty large segment of the Netflix audience that watches like European thrillers, no Scandinavian crime thrillers. It's like, wow, you know, like that was unthinkable even. Yeah, 10, 15 years ago, it was pretty niche. Do you know what I mean? And K-drama, I think, has has become relatively mainstream.
As a president of New York Asian Film Festival, what is the goal of NYAFF in USA this year and the near future?
I mean, the purpose of all festivals, and it's ours as well, I mean, or at least in theory it should be, is to discover new talent, new films, new filmmakers. That hasn't really changed, but considering the nature of what film has become, watching Asian film is a much more banal thing now, right? Or an Asian story. Again, you turn on Netflix and bam, that's it. And also, films have a shorter and shorter lifespan, so we work with a much more concentrated uh, sort of time frame, right? Like a film comes out 2 weeks later, it's on IPTV in Korea or on Netflix and so on. So you really have to track the films early, and you have a very short time window to decide what you're going to do. What I think has always been an uphill battle is what people think they know. Like people have seen a Kurosawa movie once, they've seen Parasite, and they think, wow, yeah, I know Korean movies. Have you seen? I've seen Parasite. Like, yeah, well, Korea produces a lot of movies, even though the Korean film industry is in a crisis right now, a very serious ton of stuff that's behind. It's really like this big tree hiding the forest. We're going to keep supporting new filmmakers, underrepresented voices, regions that aren't necessarily as hot as Japan and Korea globally, Southeast Asia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam has been on our radar for quite a while. So that means it's watching a lot of films, and we travel. My team and I travel to all the film markets and festivals to discover new films, new directors, new actors, and so on. Anticipate the taste of the local audience, figuring out what to do internationally with your film.
You just mentioned that the Korean entertainment market or film market is in a crisis. What do you mean, and are you allowed to talk about it?
Like commercial cinema is in a deep state of crisis. Like the viewership in general has gone down. Also, I mean, there's an increasing presence of non-Korean content on Korean screens. For decades, for several years, Korean cinema was sort of protected from Hollywood and particularly from Hollywood by screen quotas. So theaters had a mandate. They were obligated by the government to show a number of Korean films. I think those were excellent measures because ultimately, I mean, Hollywood has enough financial power to essentially buy out all the theaters and just flood every national market with their films. Like you can. That's what has happened in many different countries around the world. So it's in a deep state of crisis. That is, Koreans don't really go watch Korean films as much as they used to. Every now and then, they're like, you have a film that's about, Korean resilience against Japan, let's say, like Harbin did really well. Every now and then, there's a little bit of a surge, and then it's come down. But then again, you could argue that the Korean film industry is a long series of bubbles and bust. So it's this cycle of crisis and resurgences. So that's been the case for a long time. So I think it'll recover, but this is a particularly severe crisis now. A lot of the traditional film funding sources have just disappeared, and it's a little bit like the 80s when all of a sudden you have television and VHS like completely change the game in terms of what watching a film meant. So it's a little similar to what happened in the 80s. So Netflix completely disrupted the game. And Korea, in a sense, you have this bizarre sort of schizophrenia where, on the one hand, it's become a global powerhouse, and people in France, in the UK, Germany, in the US, they have this sense that Korea is this really huge hot thing. They're not wrong, but at the same time, the way for film at least, the way the industry is structured, you need very solid box office revenue in Korea to be able to make it. International sales are one thing. Like essentially, you really are still very reliant on selling your film in Korea. So if it doesn't really work out, it's pretty tough for you. So you have this tension. I think you have the same thing in the K-pop industry as well. You have this sometimes pretty drastic differences between what Koreans like in terms of K-pop band and music and what foreigners like. Sometimes I see completely disaligned, not aligned at all in terms of what they're looking for and in terms of what they like or dislike about K-pop.
So even with the rise of like Squid Games, Parasite, and all these like K entertainment, I know you said it's like a fragile phenomenon.
To an extent, I'm hopeful and skeptical at the same time. Yeah, it's a little bit fragile because ultimately, Korea is well built as as a hub for Asia. Like it's pretty solid. It's been done for years. There's the precedent in the 90s. At the time, like SES used to perform in Taiwan and so on, and then BoA was the first sort of really like Pan-Asian phenomenon, right? Now, the global level, I'm not 100% convinced because the system is very local. So it works within Korean culture. You can, you've been through this, right? You have this system. It's a little messed up, but it keeps going. But now it's reaching its limits. Like, you have all these scandals in terms of like treating the performers very poorly. A lot of foreigners won't take that. So the K-pop industry is trying to expand and do things with other countries. The Korean system is so specific. So it's to go back to the film industry. I think it's very hard for Korean film directors to work with non-Korean crews. They have a really hard time. Like Park Chan-wook, I don't think he really knows how to work with. Okay, maybe I shouldn't talk about that. I don't think it's easy for guys like him to work with American crews. I just don't really. I mean, at the same time, you have to think in terms of your career, not just as an artist. If foreigner tells you, "Oh, here's a sci-fi film," like, can you really say no? I mean, oh, hey, direct this. Here's $150 million. Make this movie. Okay. I'm talking, of course, about Mickey 17. I don't know how much of it is Bong's desire to make this story come versus what the studio wants. There's this tension right now, and so far, examples of Korean filmmakers making English language films. I don't think it's a great track record so far. Like Kim Ji-yoon, when remember he worked with Arnold Schwarzenegger over 10 years ago. Yeah, that's not exactly a gem what he did there. Let's just say his English language films are not his best by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he won for like what he considered a very local project, Parasite. So there's this tension between what Korea is and what the global market is, and the transformation from sort of a Asian powerhouse to a global powerhouse. I think that's quite difficult.
Maybe like they don't need to collaborate. Do you think like maybe just strictly Korean films will continue to just be a global, trend?
I used to be pretty okay at predicting trends, but I think it's just the world in general is so unpredictable. Parasite, I didn't really see it coming. At some point, a few months before the Oscars, I was like, it's going to win at least the international category. There's no way it's not going to win. Simply why? Simply because all the Academy members that I'm aware of, that I knew, they'd seen the film. Quite simply, they had seen it. They hadn't seen many of the other films. It's good, like that fits the taste of the Academy and what they think is a good film. It's also, like Bong had already set up a reputation like with his Netflix movie with Okja. I think like Bong Joon-ho did really well with Parasite because he's talking about stuff he knows. The guy has some education in sociology. He had a pretty solid academic background, and it's about Korean society. But I think this is the kind of stuff that works. Like you're making a film locally about the stuff and it has a universal appeal. And not everything is like that, of course, but there's a sincerity to it. Like it's not like you're trying to riff off something. To me, the biggest problem is Koreans. That's not the only Asian country that's like that. Japan has that as well. They have their idea of what Americans want or what the rest of the world wants, right? You go to a Korean food event, they always serve you the same stuff. So that applies to other aspects as well. They go, okay, so you know what? How about we do a zombie film? Okay, let's try zombie. They're gonna like it. So they have their own idea of what could work overseas, and that doesn't often match very well what audiences expect. That not that what audiences expect is right, but there's like this contradiction between the two. So a lot of these efforts fall flat on their faces. So there's a middle ground in there that you can find. I mean, there are stories that could work, but very often it just really comes from out of nowhere, very artificial. And there's of course Hollywood and American ignorance of stuff. Like I remember I had this friend of mine who shall remain, whose name shall remain, yeah, unspoken. So he was working on a project about a story about a Chinese American teacher, right? I forgot exactly what the story was about. And then, so he talks to his agent, it's a pretty big agency, and they go, oh, okay, so how about Stephen Young? And then he goes like, my friend goes like, yeah, okay, but it's about a Chinese American teacher, it's my friend's Taiwanese. And the guy goes, isn't it the same thing? He's like, who cares? And he's like, no, but this is what I want. So sometimes there's a lack of understanding that Asia is a pretty complex thing with antagonisms between countries, and not a lot of Koreans like to be confused with with Chinese or Japanese people. That happened 2 or 3 years ago. Do you know what I mean? So that was not a long time ago. So we still live in that. Do you know what I mean? Like, so for example, so the second season of Beef is coming out. So that to me is probably one of the best, maybe the best Asian American narrative that I've seen. I was like, okay, these are fleshed out characters. There's no coming of age in this. These characters are very real. You believe in them. Like at some point, you suspend your disbelief, and it's no longer Ali Wong or Stephen Young. You see really real characters, like the relationship to Christianity, for example. I'm like, this is 100% authentic. It's very gripping, great story. So I really kind of expected at least a mostly sort of Asian American story for the second season. I mean, when I saw who the cast was, I'm like, but why? Well, why are they changing the shift? I mean, it's interesting. A lot of Asian American guys are pretty angry about being sort of, there's the whole issue of demasculinization, of Asian American males on screen. So all of a sudden, you're making this shift. I mean, like, there's a reason why beef works so well. There's a lot of internalization of being sort of you're not considered imaginative, a leader, like standards of success, pressure to succeed, and so on. So there's a lot this rage sort of boiling inside, and like in the film, it translates itself in this insane road rage incident that keeps escalating. So yeah, I was quite disappointed to see the shift. But we'll see how the show turns.
You've stated that you had fair share of encounters with famous Korean actors and directors like Lee Byung-hun, Ryu Jun-yeol, and Han Ji-min. Is there any fun backstory with these huge celebrities in Korea?
Yeah, there's some fun stuff. Okay, I have to be very careful when I talk about. Wei Byung-hun is a really nice guy, like a very, very nice guy. His English is quite good, so my Korean is kind of terrible, so that made things easier. Humble, that's pretty great. I've seen others who are a lot less fun and accessible than he is. Same, well, in general, that company. The actors are very well behaved, and BH Entertainment. Well, Jimin likes to drink. I was kind of surprised at the difference between her persona on screen, because she tends to play, the good girls and stuff. It's not that she's a bad girl behind the scenes, but she's more feisty in person, like kind of a very different personality. She was in a movie called Miss Beck. It's pretty good. Yeah, about this sort of rough Ajumma, and really good film. I would strongly recommend it. She's more like this character than I imagine her, because I've seen her in TV dramas before. I thought she'd be more like a little demure and a little. But she's really great. I really also enjoyed. I hung out with her in Macau. I brought Lee Jung-jae to New York in 2015. At the time, it was already he's been a pretty big name in Korea for a long time, way before Squid Game, right? Even today, now, even though again we were talking about that earlier, how Korean entertainment is now, yeah, it's a global phenomenon.
Wow. So for up and coming, like specifically Asian Americans who want to get into the film market, do you have any advice? Like how they can break through into this, making a lot of audition tapes, or like, is it networking?
There's a lot of networking. It's a lot of for the actors in particular. I mean, yeah, I mean in the US, the shapes are a must. Like, yeah, don't be afraid to. A lot of things in the arts and film is about taking risk. You just can't play it safe, and don't try to tailor things for what you think. That's a lot of what we talked about somehow today. Don't try to tailor things for what you think the director or this guy, the casting director wants. That's just, you don't know. You just don't know that guy unless you've networked with him. But even then, how much do you really know the person, right? So, okay. So my basic advice is imagination is good, but you're doing this for yourself. Like you have to have high standards for yourself. Don't try and please someone you don't know so much. That almost never works out. It's to work on yourself. It's why it's called artistic expression. There's a seduction part as well, particularly for actors. You want to seduce the viewer, but that's another matter. But primarily you want to say something about yourself, something that you know. So that's my advice. A lot of these actors, you have to. I think actors take a lot of flag these days, for saying stuff about them. I mean, in real life, they're just like anybody else. They have their own political views and so on. But when you're on screen, it's your body, it's your face that people judge. If they don't like they don't like you. It's a huge chance you're taking to put yourself out there in front of a screen. People hear your voice, your real voice. You know what I mean? So you're being judged for what you are. Your appearance is part of what you are, and how you project yourself, how you modulate your voice, and so on. So that's an immense risk. I mean, as a director, you're behind the camera, and you're protected. You have all these guys who are doing it for you. They are the shadows on the wall. They're projecting their representations of them.
Well, you have your own film coming up, Huntress, I believe. Could you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's a World War II Philippines set drama, action drama. It's basically about guerrilla warfare in the Philippines during the Pacific War. So I came across this story a while ago. I mean, this a pretty long story, but to cut, yeah, long story short, I came across this piece of newspaper from like way back of this photo of a woman showing a GI in 1945 how to use a machete, like in black and white. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. Who's that? And so this woman, she really existed. Her name was Nieves Fernandez, and she's just a school teacher in Leyte Island, one of the many islands of the Philippines. So by the end of the war, she was the most wanted person in Southeast Asia by the Japanese Imperial Army. So, like, Japanese Imperial Armies put a huge bounty on her head. She was a resistance organizer, almost like a Southeast Asian ninja. They used to call her the silent killer. She would walk in the jungle barefoot, that kind of stuff. So I discovered this aspect of Southeast Asian resistance against Japan. I was like, this is really interesting narrative. Another time, I was also fascinated by, for example, Kurdish resistance in the Middle East. You had these Kurdish women, or same in Ukraine, like people who were like doctors and stuff, just learning how to use a machine gun and stuff in completely asymmetrical warfare. You're fighting against an enemy that has 10 times the material resources that you do. So that's the source of inspiration behind it. It's partially loosely based on the story of that woman. It also represents what happened across Southeast Asia when you had a large number of women leading the fight. So I thought that was a good story to tell, like ordinary individuals forced to become exceptional under exceptional circumstances. But the other aspect that I always wanted to talk about was the nature of like Korean identity as well. I mean, I studied in Japan for a few years. I'm a ethnic Korean, right? So I wanted to really tell a story about who really took part in that war, because one thing that's not always talked about, for example, the kamikaze planes, the suicide planes, a lot of them were handled by Korean, ethnic Koreans. So it's not necessarily, I don't believe a lot of them were overjoyed to be doing that. So I wanted to talk about how, like during wars, you enlist people, whether they want it or not, to fight for a side they don't necessarily support. And like, what do you do in that case? So the antagonist is this Japanese Imperial Army soldier who's actually an ethnic Korean. But what did that mean in 1942, 1945, being a Korean man while your country is technically part of the Japanese Empire? So that's also a question I wanted to raise. It's, really about this badass woman or this ordinary sort of school teacher becomes kind of a badass under the pressure of circumstances. And it's this man-woman hunt, a little bit like there's a few examples of that. It's like sniper versus sniper. She's in the jungle, like the Philippine jungle, so the environment she knows very well, versus another guy who's one of the top snipers from the Japanese Imperial Army. So there's this cat and mouse game between the two. We should be shooting in the winter of this year or next year, sometime between December and February 2026.
Well, that was such an interesting discussion. I just want to say thank you so much for all your amazing knowledge in the film industry.
Well, thank you, Grace. I watch your channel pretty
Oh,
regularly.
thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. It's always interesting. I learn a lot of stuff.
Thank you guys so much for watching, and I can't wait for the next Korean film or Asian film to blow up in the global market like Squid Games and Parasite did. See you guys in the next video.